Oh my goodness. What a pleasure it is to have you here. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Thank you, Meg. I'm super excited to be here.
Yes, absolutely. So let's just jump right in. How did you decide to get into mental health? What led you down that road?
Oh, probably my own mental health. Uh, I mean, it's not something that I think I decisively said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start talking about the skeletons in my closet. But I started blogging about motherhood when I was pregnant with my second child.
Uh-huh.
He was a rainbow baby,
Yeah.
and it just felt weird that I wasn't supposed to talk about it yet. Like it just seemed wrong that we encourage mothers or expectant mothers to not speak openly about being pregnant in the first trimester. It's like, well, why wouldn't we? Like, even if the baby didn't come to term, mothers would need support just as much as, if not more. Like, I don't, it
Yes.
made no sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I started blogging about it then when I wasn't supposed to,
Yeah.
just kind of putting together my thoughts on this part of the journey, especially after coming after miscarriage, and just how volatile it felt and scary and um, confusing, but exciting, so
Yeah.
many different feelings going on. And from there, I just kind of kept going. And what started as kind of motherhood blogging turned into motherhood mental health blogging, turned into sober blogging.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
here I
So the
am. Yeah.
evolution started there. I would love to spend just a couple more minutes on this because we do have this. I mean, even the royal family don't make announcements until after 12 weeks. It's like an actual thing. And it was really interesting in my own fertility journey. We had started trying to get pregnant in like October. I found out in December that I was. We called everyone, we FaceTimed. I was the magical carrier of children. I was like, this is happening, so exciting. And then I had a pregnancy loss at 8 weeks, 7 or 8 weeks. It's been a while,
Yeah.
so kind of let some of the details drift. But the
Yeah.
next time we found out I was pregnant, I wanted to tell people, and my husband really didn't. And that's certainly a personal choice as well. But it's a kind of a binary choice there. Either you tell people or you don't. And certainly you can tell some people and not everybody, but it's really interesting because people have that cautious optimism or just terror because it's happened again. And we ended up losing that pregnancy as well, around 7 and 8 weeks. And so I've had this conversation with a lot of people saying, right, like you do whatever works for you and what makes sense for you and your partner. And but it really is this expectation or like, oh no, don't tell anybody, don't talk about it. So
Right.
I'm glad to hear that you are also using your platform to spread the word on that as well.
Well, it felt like who are we trying to take care of with this narrative? Like who are we trying to protect? Because it didn't feel like we were trying to protect the mother. The mother needed the support. So are we trying to protect everybody else from a potential mother's pain? Like that's
Mhm.
where I started to kind of dig a little bit deeper. Like who who is this a convenient social narrative for? And I kind of was a little angry about it because
Yeah.
it didn't sit right with me, and it still doesn't. And I hope that we can kind of change that narrative because I think we need support throughout a pregnancy, not just when we know it's viable.
Right. That was my case. It wasn't an argument with my husband for our second pregnancy. Um, was I'm going to grieve with people if this is a pregnancy loss. Why not give them the opportunity to celebrate with me in the beginning? Why not give them the opportunity to support me, us in this situation, especially given the fact that this was our second pregnancy after a loss, our first pregnancy
Yeah.
after a loss, second overall. And um, I love how you're describing that though. Like who are we protecting here? Who are we supporting? Whose feelings are we trying not to hurt? What? I don't know.
Yeah. It feels a little more a little darker if we dig into it too much. But
Yeah.
I do think that there's some very adverse mental health effects when we keep infertility journeys or whatnot secretive if you don't want them to be secretive. Like if you're
Right.
keeping it secretive, or you're keeping a miscarriage a secret because that's what society expects us to be doing, that's a problem.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's like figuring out how do we give ourselves permission to take up space,
Yeah.
and to fight against systems that are in place that don't serve us.
And to grieve in public,
Yes. Yeah.
and to experience the not positive human emotions that many of us experience. Like there's
Yeah.
just so many things.
Yeah. It's just interesting, right? Because it feeds into the toxic positivity culture of everything's great, everything's
Yeah.
wonderful. This is going to be, and it's not everything is all the time, and that's okay.
Right. And it's normal. And it doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong.
Yeah. Absolutely. So how did you get then from starting the blog, wanting to start sharing what was going on, to then creating the Ultimate Mom Challenge?
Yeah. I was writing for a while, just about motherhood, about my experience with motherhood. And I was even getting ready to publish a book about my motherhood journey.
Uh-huh.
And I had an agent. We were getting like the proposal rolling. And in the middle of all that, I kind of came to terms with my problematic drinking,
Mm.
that I needed to make a change. This was not healthy or sustainable. It really, I think I would consider myself a gray area drinker, because a lot of times I could control my drinking, but sometimes I couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very all over the place, and it was not predictable. And that scared me as a parent. I mean, more so because everything's on the line now. So I had this come to terms moment where I was like, I need to try this without alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
and see if I didn't feel like I was being the mother I wanted to be. I wasn't showing up as the mother I always envisioned myself to be. And I knew, like deep inside, I knew that alcohol was at the core of that.
Mm.
And it was really stifling me from being fully present in the
Mm-hmm.
way I had always wanted to be a mom. But here I was now at this place where I was just phoning it into 5 o'clock. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's how it felt. Like even when I wasn't drinking, or even on days I wasn't drinking, I was just always thinking about it and always wishing I could kind of blur those lines,
Mm-hmm.
or numb out, or have that reward that felt so deserved at the end of a hard day of parenting.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I finally quit, it really was kind of kicking and screaming, because I just didn't know what life could look like without it, or if I wanted to know. And so I quit with the understanding that I really had no choice. This is just something I had to do, but it genuinely felt like I was depriving myself of something wonderful for the rest of my life. So it felt like such an ugly thing. It felt like something shameful, and something that I would never want anybody to know about me. So I kept it very quiet, and I kept it secretive for the first year. And it
Mm.
wasn't until I reached 1 year sober that I realized, like, all the things I had been wanting for myself as a mom, for the way I showed up in life and as a parent, were coming to me through my sobriety.
Mm-hmm.
That this wasn't something to be ashamed of, that, sobriety is the opposite of deprivation. It is liberation. And I wanted to be public about that. I wanted to be vocal about that because maybe my story would inspire somebody who was in the same place I was a year ago. So I wrote about it. And I wrote about it to my platform, having never mentioned it before, having never touched the subject. And I got so much positive feedback. And even my agent reached out to me and said, we have to change your book. Like, this is your first book. This is the story. And everything changed after that in terms of, I started putting together what a book proposal would look like around this. And I started writing more openly about my sober journey for my audience. And it felt very liberating in that regard too. And I got so many messages from people who were either exactly where I was with the gray area drinking, or who was also sober, or who felt just socially isolated because they weren't big drinkers and they felt like they didn't fit in anywhere because we live in such an alcohol infused society. So it was fascinating. And it really was something I started to lean into more as my recovery journey went along.
Yeah. I've already announced that I always like to give a caveat when I talk to people about their sobriety on my show, because my husband sells wine and spirits for a living. And so that is an ongoing conversation that we do have. Our children see us open a nice bottle of wine at dinner sometimes, or if we're at a social gathering and we're having some high noons, and recognizing what that is, like not making it feel other so that they are enticed to sneak and find freedom or whatever when they have the opportunity, but then also not encouraging it in a way. And that honestly is just going to be an ongoing, my children are 2 and 4. So we've got a little bit of time, but not even really, because, they know what a beer is.
Sure.
And so, and it's really interesting too, because what you were describing, absolutely. I mean, this isn't my therapy session, but we moved to Kansas City from Houston on March of 2020 on St. Patrick's Day is when we left. And so we moved here to a city. I'd never been in Kansas at all, let alone lived here. Didn't know a single person, had an 8-month-old baby. COVID quarantine had started. And so I was a stay-at-home mom for 4. And I remember it was like, all right, when's beer o'clock? Like that's what all of our mom groups and not just moms, there were men too, but that really was the energy, especially. So quarantine did no one any favors, right? But
no.
And I don't know if that, I obviously wasn't the birthplace of the mom wine culture, but I really think that it took an uptick there and really became like the post that you talked about, like there's a sports bra with like the bags that you can it's like a Camelback, but for a sports bra. And it's just like such a normalization of like, mommy needs a drink.
Like there's no bad time. Yeah. That parenting is the only excuse we need to partake. And that is, so mommy wine culture has been around for a very long time, and it's been an evolution of so many things. But think about, Rolling Stones with Mommy's Little Helper. I mean, that was from, the 60s, 70s. So this is really the evolution of a general message that mothers need to sedate themselves to endure motherhood and parenting. And so while it's nothing new, it really proliferated in the 2010s with social media exploding. It became a very easy way to kind of share this message that mommy needs wine, or my kids whine, so I whine. And, when I talk about this, people say, well, please don't judge me for drinking alcohol. I want to be very clear. It's really not about someone who happens to be a mom who's drinking alcohol. The problem that I really have with the mommy wine culture narrative is that mothers and parents need to drink because of our children, that they're the reason we need to drink. And that's really the crux of the problem to this message. You could take that a million different directions, but that's where I kind of see the root of this. It's our kids are our excuse to drink, and also the harmful message that intones on our kids that they're the reason we need to sedate ourselves.
Yeah.
So that's when I was kind of really digging into, because I've done it both ways. I have been a huge part of mommy wine culture. I used to share the memes, I used to write the memes.
Yeah.
I've done that side of it. Now on the other side of it, as a sober mom, I really dug into where's the problem here. What gives me that icky feeling in my gut? And that's kind of the root of what I discovered is just this cultural understanding that our kids are the reason, that we need alcohol to cope with the challenges of raising these children. And I say that as a daughter of an alcoholic. I can't even imagine my father walking around with a t-shirt that said, "My kids are the reason I drink." I mean, to have that additional trauma on what is already, growing up in a family of addiction, that's not the energy I certainly want to be showcasing for my children, but for any children, really.
Yeah. Wow. That's exactly right. And I mean, I've actually thought about that before too. I think about the things that I say on my social media, obviously on my podcast. And I worry about the day in the future that my kids get bored enough in life to want to look at what I'm doing. But I do, because I've said that before. I'm like, I feel like I'm at my best place to deal with the stress of my children when I'm like one high noon in. And that's not, and I'm aware of that when it comes out of my mouth. And I'm like, gosh, that is depressing. And if they ever, and again, children, if you're listening in the very long future, I'm sorry, but I don't say that in front of them, but I have thought about that. Like, how would a person internalize that? Like, I'm the reason she drinks. And it's not really, I don't think the mommy wine culture is about the children. This is where I'm going with this. So let me just make the better, more clear segue. One of your posts was talking about, like, instead of needing to understand, like, mommy needs wine, like, why don't we look at why mommies are broken and overwhelmed and burnt out, that they feel the need to be sedated in the first place.
Yeah. And I that's really, because let's look at the stats, even pre-pandemic, the increase in women's drinking has been growing exponentially, especially in the past decade. So we've got that already. We already knew about that pre-pandemic. Pandemic hits, it goes up even higher. And we're seeing, stats that are showing that the increase in women between age 35 to 55 going to the ER for alcohol-related visits has skyrocketed. I mean, a lot of really alarming medical results that are coming from binge or high-risk drinking that are newer. They're newer trends. And to see that, and my whole thing when I was writing this book was why, what motherhood in the 50s was really freaking hard too. So why is now women grabbing their wine, clutching their wine and drinking in this way, almost drinking at the frustrations and problems. And what I found was, there's a bunch of things happening, but systemically, we are in a place where, the village doesn't exist, right? I think most mothers can argue there is no village. It's a urban legend. There's no phone number to call. Like, we are in this on our own. And I think there's a bunch of reasons for that, but we just don't have the socioeconomic support that maybe other countries have, or that we used to have.
Yes.
More women are returning to work than ever before. So being a homemaker is not the most common place a mother is in 2023, as opposed to where we were 50 years ago. So
Sure.
to take on the mental load of being a working mom, in addition to what is going on at the home front, has added pressure, responsibility, challenges to mothers of today's age, as opposed to maybe our parents' generation or their previous generations. And then when you look at the lack of equal or unequal distribution of labor on the home front, there's still a very traditional idea that in a traditional home with a man and a woman, the woman's job is to take care of the household chores and the childcare, even if both people in the family are working. And the most recent stats I've seen show that in a home where both the husband and wife are working, the woman takes on twice the household tasks and twice the childcare. So the amount of leisure time available to women is extremely less so than that of men. And this is just a unique place and time where we are more women than not are returning to work. And we just don't have the support systems in place to make this sustainable. And instead of reducing the load or redistributing the labor at home, it's almost pushed on ourselves and each other to just numb out. You know, if it's not mommy wine culture, it's going to be cannabis mom in the next, well, maybe now, but that's just going to grow over the next 5 to 10 years. You know, I would bet money. Because
I mean, Ohio just legalized recreational marijuana 2 days ago at the time of recording. So it is literally growing. Yes.
And it's a hell of a lot easier to tell the mothers in our society to just shut up and numb out than get vocal and speak out. And that's where we are. That's where we're at.
Oh my gosh. Wow. What? Yes. Wow. Yeah. And it really is. It really is. I just think about, it's interesting in a lot of my therapy clients where we talk about like where things come from and are these internal voices or external voices, and how is this, it seems to be a core belief, but is it really my core belief, or is it what it was told was mine? And not to quote the Barbie, which if you're watching on YouTube, I'm literally wearing Barbie pink right now, but like the patriarchy and the historical space and capitalism and all of the things that have driven us to the space where we are productive in these ways and meaningful and useful in these ways. And yet we're not continuing to evolve. We're still doing those things and all these, and it's not, and even like the lack of equity in pay. And I also have this conversation with clients who are stay-at-home parents where it's like, well, yeah, from 8 to 5, my job is stay-at-home parent, but from 5 to 8, we're a couple. And there's a lot of disconnect there. A lot of working partners who have a stay-at-home partner are kind of like, oh, what are you making for dinner? What are you making them for dinner? Or what, you know, everything falls on them. And it's like, that's not a 24-hour job. It's 8 to 5 and 5 to 8, or insert time here. And that's a really hard thing for a lot of people to conceptualize.
It's a newer conversation. It's not something that my parents' generation ever talked about. We're in a place now where talking about, you know, equal distribution of labor at home, or parents who work outside of the home versus in the home, and how a parent is never off duty, never. So why is somebody who's getting paid a salary, why do they get to put their feet up when they get back home, but the person who's working from home doing all the unpaid labor, why is their time less valuable? And why are they therefore determined that they don't get a break? They don't get to put their feet up.
Right.
They have a 24/7 job. That's where we have to kind of have these newer conversations about labor at home, the mental load, reassumption of roles and reevaluating responsibilities, because the mental load of motherhood has put more mothers in place than we've ever seen before, who are drinking or drugging to numb out at a very impossible situation. And it's not their freaking fault. Like, Like if anybody's listening to this who's like, yeah, I'm there, but what do you expect? It's like, that's just it. Like, it's an impossible position.
Yes. Yes. And I was excited anyway, because I love, cherish, and adore you, but I really was excited to have this conversation because I recognize some of these own patterns myself, which obviously is a conversation for me and my therapist, but the village conversation, right? Like, we are just now starting to make some pretty solid friends here in Kansas City. My family live 8 hours away. My husband's live in Florida. And so there never is that opportunity of just like, can you come and watch the kids, and dad and I are going to go have a dinner? Or, and we're very lucky we have the best babysitter in the world. Hi, Mackenzie. But so we have those opportunities, but like, we don't do multi-generational living anymore in the United States for the most part. Whereas like your sister and brother and grandma and your parents, and we're all in the same house or in the same area. And so the village did literally exist. And now we're so isolated and spread and figure it out, and yet we continue to preach the village, and the rest of us are like, great, sign me up. Where?
Yeah, how do I enroll? But the other thing that I think also just bites our butt every time, and I think this is pretty American specific, but maybe not, is this concept of individualism, the mommy who can do it all,
Yes,
and make
yes,
it look
yes,
easy, and asking for help is a sign of weakness.
yes.
And I know this bit me in the ass so much before I quit drinking, because it felt to me like even asking my partner to step in more and to be more involved in the parenting felt like I was just sucking as a mom.
Yeah.
And that mindset, that mentality is so it'll just eat you alive. It's eaten me alive. And
Yes.
I would absolutely drink at that feeling, the
Yes.
feeling that I am drowning, but if I tell anybody I'm drowning, I am a bad mom.
Right. So let me just numb out over here and figure out how to deal with it. I literally have processed this, again, coming back to those messages that are external. Not for nothing, and the energy was good, but like growing up in the 90s, I was born in the 80s, but like growing up in elementary school and junior high in the 90s, it was very much like girls can do anything, girl power, da da da. And so then we like a lot of us internalized that, like AFAB women, of like, I need to do everything. I need to do everything. And it's like, and I've really been processing with some of my clients, like, how do we dismantle this? Because asking for help is a sign of weakness. You're doing it wrong. You're failure. And it's so not. It's so not. Like, how can we say, like, use your village that doesn't exist? We've already established, but like, use the village. And also you need to do it all yourself. And we glorify the moms doing it all. We're like, oh, look at her. She's a superhero. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to be. Like, yeah. Thank you. But I'll also maybe do something.
Right. I mean, it's meant as a compliment, but it's really a means of shutting people up, because if somebody calls you a superhero, you can't go, I'm a drowning superhero.
Yes. It's you're a superhero. Keep it the status quo.
Yes. Period.
And keep going.
End of conversation. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And I wish I had the answers. It's so funny. I teach at the University of Kansas, and I say this sometimes to my students, like, if I had Professor Meg, no answers, but I don't know what the answer is here. I think it does start with individual self-talk. I think it starts with having these conversations openly and normalizing the fact that we are doing, I don't want to say too much, but we're doing so much, or too much perhaps. That's a very individualized conversation, whatever too much is for you, but we're doing too much and we're stressing too much and we're having all of these conversations. And then I'm obviously biased, but I think getting some sort of therapy or group coaching or something going on where you can express this in a meaningful way, being able to create vulnerable and safe spaces with your partner to be able to express these things. And that's another thing that I talk about a lot with clients about, like, if you can't get vulnerable and be open with each other, we're not going to make a lot of progress, because it can't all be a one-sided thing. You can't just stop taking your kids to school or stop doing the dishwasher, or like,
right. And that resentment does build, and it can feed off you in other ways. Like for me, I fed into that resentment by drinking, but I know so many people do it in other ways too. It could be compulsive shopping,
Yeah.
or eat, problematic eating. I mean, there's a lot of ways we can inadvertently harm ourselves because we are trying to distract ourselves from conversations that need to be had, resentments that are building. I mean, so many things that need to be taken care of at the source.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And I'm curious, kind of like, how does your sober mom squad kind of address that? What does that look like? How did it come together? Where are y'all going? How do we support all of it?
Yeah, so the sober mom squad started in March of 2020.
Hey,
No surprise.
how about that?
And we already talked about kind of why or how that came about, just because the pressure and like you said, the energy was just, alcohol will solve this, or alcohol will get us through, quarantinis, all the things. So
Yes.
Emily Lynn Paulson started Sober Mom Squad. I was one of the founding hosts, and we just started doing meetings every Wednesday for anybody who identified as a mom and was curious or currently sober from alcohol. And we just started connecting. And from that, it's just started to build and grow to now it's a full-blown community with 3 to 6 meetings a day, our own private app off Facebook, all the things. I still host there twice a week, and I run the book club, and it's become my community. And we talked a little bit too about the importance of community. I quit drinking without a community, so now having a community, I see how much I was missing in those early days, and how much harder I made it on myself by not having that group of other moms that I could go to and say, I feel like I'm failing every day. All the things that we say in our heads to ourselves all the time, but we can't say out loud because then we'll get judged or shamed. This became the group where I could say, I was drinking too much. I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. I would wake up in the morning and check my phone and not remember sending text messages. I mean, all those deep, dark secrets that I felt so afraid of revealing. I had a safe place, and now mothers have this safe place that we can tell each other this, and it doesn't have to get shared, to all our Facebook family and friends. I mean, that's the other thing. I'm very public about my sobriety. I know many people are not.
Right.
And I have people on my Facebook who DM me and they say, there's so many things you write that I want to comment or say something about, but if I write it, will people in my network see it? And I'm like, yes. Don't share it unless you want Aunt Martha to see it, because that's how Facebook works. But if you have a private community or a support system that is, in a vault, and it's just, you can share your deepest, darkest secrets in a way that feels so liberating. And they say the opposite of addiction is connection. And as somebody who has been in a sober community now for over 3 years, I could not agree with it more.
Yeah. I've heard that a lot too. The opposite of addiction is connection. And it's true, because again, I think that's the thing about a lot of parenting concerns, a lot of moms feeling alone, or this is just me, or like, I've had a really rough week with my kids and I've texted. I do have a really loving, supportive group of friends that I can text and be like, I'm drowning, you all. So what do we, and I hate to hear that everyone else is going through it. It's not a like, oh, thank goodness. I'm so happy you're miserable too. But it's very helpful to feel normalized. Like, oh, my kids are assholes too this week. Like, oh, okay, well, I guess maybe like the moon is pulling us, or Saturn's in a different space, or who knows. But to be able to be in a space where you feel normalized, you're drinking to numb, to cope is not a you problem. It's so much more than just that. And there are people who will support and validate and bolster you.
Yeah. And I think in addiction, it's really easy to feel like our problems are ours alone. And one of a famous recovery saying is, you are not unique. Like nothing I was experiencing in those darker days of my drinking or even in my early sobriety, nothing about it was unique.
Right.
There are thousands of people going through the exact same thing. And when you can share what you're going through and have somebody say, I've been there, or I'm there right now, it empowers us to know that we're not alone and that we have a group of people who are rooting us on.
Yeah. And you've even gone so far, you're a certified recovery coach. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah. I mean, I got my certification last year, and I'm not heavily practicing that, but I really did it because I wanted to add a recovery coach certification to my hosting, to really feel like I could help women even more in our sober space than I was already. And also to help with what I was writing about. It felt like having an education background behind a lot of the things I share about around my sobriety and addiction and gray area drinking. I can back it with kind of the education component of somebody who, has some background. So that was the main reasons I got that. But it also, has just been a great part of reinforcing and re-encouraging kind of this idea of the science behind why we do what we do, which I have found so empowering in my own recovery is, when you go beyond just the, why do I do this, to the, how is my brain working? And how does alcohol change the chemicals in my brain, or what's going on in my body? That has been really powerful information for me to maintain my sobriety.
Yeah, well, that's very true. I mean, I think about that all the time. Honestly, I'm like, gosh, I wonder, because you hear, well, I'm going to forget that 90s band singer just died from liver failure. Oh my gosh. Oh,
Smash Mouth. Yeah.
Smash Mouth. Yes. Ooh, was not going to get there, but yeah. And other people, whether famous or not, you hear who die so young, the expression they drank themselves to death, which is, not a compassionate way to describe it, but it is a very concerning thing. And to what level and to what degree, and everyone's body is so different, certainly, but the things that we do put into our body, and when we're younger, and then we start to get a little older and we start to recognize maybe that,
feel it more.
Yeah, maybe we're not as invincible as we once envisioned.
Well, I found, even just the anatomy of one night of maybe high risk drinking, and learning about what is going on in my brain and my body in 24 hours has been eye-opening. I mean, when you understand, the dopamine goes up and then it dips and goes even below where it would be in a neutral zone. And then it has to work even harder to get back to homeostasis. I mean, for me, hearing kind of the science of how that's all working in my body and how it's all working against me as my body desperately tries to get the alcohol out of my system. And this is even just one or two drinks. This isn't somebody getting sloshy drunk. That's how our bodies process alcohol. I just found finding information like that was really convincing to help me recognize that I wasn't doing myself any favors consuming the alcohol anyway. And for as long as I fooled myself into believing that this is even healthy in moderation, the science shows otherwise. And that has been really an empowering way for me to maintain my sobriety.
I love the way that you articulated that. You painted such a beautiful visual of like, you're creating a pattern, right? So you do get that dopamine jump, which feels great, but then you go underneath and then you have to work back up. And so then you're struggling so much that you're already struggling with all the other things, and your body is actually physically struggling to process. So then you drink some more to get that dopamine hit, and then repeat.
The cycle starts all over.
Absolutely. I mean, you paint just such a verbal, like with your words, such a picture of like, oh. I don't know if people are aware. I mean, I don't even know if everyone knows what dopamine is. Like, but I don't think that people are really aware of how those things can impact you. And like you said, even on a 1 or 2 drink basis, not even a bender.
Well, and we're just having this conversation in a sober meeting earlier today, how we go into our teenage years, if not our adult years, learning how to socialize with alcohol. So we don't even know what it means to mindfully drink and recognize this pattern that's happening in our body as it's happening. Because normally we're doing it in front of other people and we're distracted, and there's a lot of distractions happening. And it's all very discombobulating. So we, societally, how many of us even know, let alone feel comfortable experiencing social interactions without some form of alcohol involved?
Right. Well, and they just, in my world, certainly, and again, we have a very uphill battle to climb, whatever battle, given my husband's job. But yeah, I mean, last night we were at a wine dinner.
Yeah. I mean, it's everywhere. And that's not to say there's anything wrong with that, but it's worth considering. It's worth reflecting on what would, for me, as somebody who never went more than a pregnancy without abstaining from alcohol until I quit drinking, who am I when I'm not consuming alcohol all the time? Like, what does Celeste even like to do? I have found out in my sobriety that there are things like being out in nature feels more transcendental than I ever realized, because I feel like I can almost absorb the energy around me than I ever knew was possible. I also learned that being at social gatherings that are chaotic or loud is very overstimulating and makes me withdraw. These are all fascinating things that I've only learned in my sobriety that I never even stopped to think, like, who would I be and what would I be like without alcohol? And it's just so interesting to be, in my mid-40s learning more about myself than I ever did in my 20s.
Fascinating, right? But it's so interesting. And I really honestly think back to like, man, I was done when I was 23. Like, we did the best we can with what we have, but what we had was not what we have at 38.
You live and learn.
Yeah, but it is really interesting too. This is a little bit of a tangent, but just mentioning, like, it's really interesting for me, especially my sensory boundaries are so greatly decreased since having had 2 children. I remember when I had my son, when he would breastfeed, I had to have my hair up. I couldn't have my hair touching me, right? And so it wasn't as bad with my daughter the second time, but I always had a scrunchie or a hair clip everywhere around the house. And so I did that for my daughter, and I was like, oh, it's not as bad this time. But then there are other things too, like the children are chitter chattering and the microwave is going and my husband pulls up a reel and I'm like, it's too much. I can't.
I agree. Motherhood is extremely overstimulating. And yet another reason where I look at my drinking and I think, no wonder, it sets everything down about 3 notches. And it feels like it makes everything a little bit more sustainable. now, without alcohol, I walk around regularly with noise canceling headphones, and I can still hear everything, but it
Yeah.
just sets it down a few notches
Yes.
because my kids are loud. Life is loud.
Yes.
Parenting is extremely loud. And
Yes.
it's okay to be like, this is too much. Like 5 people talking to me at once is too much.
Right. Right. And it's interesting that you just mentioned that. I have not a sponsor of this podcast, but if they'd like to reach out, go ahead. No, but I have those loop earplugs that I use for at night because my husband sometimes snores. Another story for another day. But I've actually seen people that are like, oh, I walk around with those in and I can still hear. I'm not ignoring people, but it just brings it down to a level that doesn't feel so invasive. I might have to start trying that.
I mean, those ads have shown up in my on my scroll more often than not, because advertising is so smart. But
Sure.
it makes, I mean, I think it's brilliant. I think that is catering to what I think a lot of the challenges we face as mothers, and to feel this need. This is the other part of motherhood that kind of goes back to our initial conversation, this need to always be available and
Yes.
to always be on, and this pressure to just, no boundaries. There's no space that is sacred. Every mother is always available for whatever anybody's needs are. Just leaves us at this place where we are drained, we are desperate, we are overstimulated, and we just need to numb out.
I was watching a reel yesterday, and I am not going to remember this person's name. I'll think on it if I can. But and he was playing both roles. So he's playing the husband and the wife, and the husband's leaving like, hey, I'm going to play golf. And the wife's like, oh, have so much fun. And she's like, Celeste is taking me to play golf tomorrow.
Oh, I saw it.
Have you seen that? It was the most genius thing I've ever seen in my life. I'll finish it up for those of you who are like, I have no idea. I think his name's Jimmy something, but he was like, wait, but you don't golf. And she's like, yeah, but you say it's so much fun. And he's like, well, wouldn't it be more convenient if you had a hobby that was in the house, like gardening at the home, I should say.
Right, where you're always available. Yeah.
And then, yes. And she literally says like, oh, that's good. Cause then I could be available if anybody needs anything, or I can make sure everything is cleaned up and or whatever. And she's like, let me think about that. No, I think the 5-hour break sounds good. And I was just like,
yeah.
But that is the reality, and not just necessarily about golf, although it is the reality about golf. And I love golf. If I could play golf every Saturday, that's a vision. Maybe one day my kids want to play golf and we can go every Saturday morning together. Hallelujah. I am not mad at people who play golf, but it's wild to me that a round at Pebble Beach has to be 4:35, and you are not playing that fast anywhere else. And some people, so you're looking at a solid 4 to 5 hours, and people feel so entitled to be able to take that. And that's golf. And then other things too, where it's just like, okay, I'm going to go over here. And then on the flip side of that, it's like, hey, did you want to go to the grocery store and I'll watch the kids? What a little treat for you. And it's like,
a little break. Yeah.
That's
not a break. That's not a break. Yeah.
Yes. And so again, I really do think like a mommy wine culture accompanies no boundaries, always available mommy culture, which is continues to be spread, and they do go hand in hand.
It's that toxic idea of get your self-care while you fold the laundry.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Absolutely correct. Yes. Well, let's chat. Let's jump into the book. What can you tell us? I'm so excited about it. I know you mentioned earlier that you were writing a different book, which is that still a possibility? I know you just launched this one, but is that a possibility for the future for the other book, or are we?
I doubt it.
On today?
Somebody told me the other day, like, you have to write that book. I don't know. So much has changed. I don't know. We'll see. I feel like every 3 months, like a different idea comes out of me. So who knows? Yeah. But this book is really, I mean, it's so many of the topics we covered today, but how to navigate our biggest stressors as mothers without alcohol. And kind of how we fell into the alcohol trap. I mean, a lot of the things we covered, and how to get out of it, because we certainly get fed this message so often that alcohol will fix what ails us. But what are some real solutions that we can actually implement today, as well as the more long-term solutions, so we can set our children up, especially our daughters, to be in a better place where they're better supported, and mothers don't bear the brunt of all the emotional and invisible labor that currently seems to fall right down onto our plates.
Yeah. Yeah, I talk about that a lot with people too. Glennon Doyle calls it tickering, but it's like, I don't want somebody to check the things off of my list. I want somebody who co-owns the list and creates it together. And we have, for so long as mothers, been the list owners, like, we can perhaps pass out a couple of tasks, but we own it, and everyone else, well, what do you want from me? And it's like, no, we need to be mutual stewards of the things that go on, and being aware, and it doesn't need to fall on just the one person.
Yeah, and kind of throwing that whole concept in the gutter, that, the mother inevitably is the person responsible for the childcare, the household labor, the mental load, the invisible work, all these things that have just seemingly fallen on our plates, while we also try to go out there and break glass ceilings and, do all the things that we wanted to do our whole lives, and not being able to navigate both at the same time, because we're, at the end of the day, we don't want to be necessarily superheroes. We just want to have human experiences.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I am resilient, but I'd like to not need to be resilient so often.
Exactly.
Yes.
Well said.
I can't thank you enough. I've been looking forward to this for so long. I'm so excited about your book and the workbook, and just getting to go into all of that. How can everybody find you? And it'll be in the show notes too, but I always like to have people say it.
Yeah, I'm on social media at the Ultimate Mom Challenge. I'm on Substack. I think it's under Celeste Yvonne or the Ultimate Mom Challenge. It's one or the other. And I post weekly there with sober support. Or you can find me at Sober Mom Squad. I lead a couple of meetings there a week.
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time. Everyone out there, go get the book, check it out. And for the rest of the time, be curious, not judgmental. Goodbye.